planet Zalera 7 had always been a place of mystery to humans. A world of iridescent skies and bioluminescent jungles. Its surface was a breathtaking yet perilous domain where the native Zalari thrived. The Zalari, an advanced yet deeply traditional alien species, lived in symbiotic harmony with their world. However, interstellar conflicts had brought chaos to their once peaceful realm, leaving them vulnerable to external threats. Commander Elias Carter never thought he'd find himself here, stranded on an alien world with nothing but his wits and a dwindling oxygen supply. His mission had been simple: escort a diplomatic envoy to the Zalari capital. But like most things in the volatile Outer Rim, nothing went as planned. Their ship had been ambushed by an unidentified war fleet. The diplomatic vessel was obliterated, and Carter, having narrowly escaped in a pod, crash-landed in the dense jungles of Zalera 7. Survival became his immediate focus. His armor, while advanced, had limited resources. The dense, humid air made breathing difficult, and the jungle floor teemed with life forms that were just as curious about him as they were deadly. The days blurred together as he scoured the land for anything that could aid him. His rations dwindled, and dehydration gnawed at him. He had no means of communication, no way to signal for help. He was utterly alone until he found her. The encounter happened when he least expected it. Carter had stumbled upon a clearing, where the unmistakable wreckage of another vessel lay smoldering. The design was Zalari, a sleek, organic-looking craft now marred by scorch marks and twisted metal. He approached cautiously, weapon raised, but as he neared the wreckage, he heard a soft, pained sound. Peering through the wreck, he found a lone figure trapped beneath a collapsed beam. She was unlike any Zalari he had seen before. Their species was known for their ethereal grace, a fusion of humanoid and insectoid features, with luminous eyes and delicate chitin-like armor covering parts of their bodies. This one, however, radiated an undeniable presence, even in her weakened state. Gold and emerald ceremonial armor adorned her form, though it was cracked and splattered with blood. Her breathing was shallow, her translucent wings twitching feebly. Carter hesitated for only a second before he moved. The beam was heavy, but he dug his boots into the soft ground, straining against the weight. With a final heave, he shifted it just enough for her to pull herself free, collapsing onto the jungle floor with a strangled gasp. Her large, luminous eyes met his, pupils dilated with pain and shock. He could tell she was trying to assess him to determine whether he was a threat. He raised his hands slightly, signaling peace. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." Her breath hitched, but she nodded weakly. He scanned her for injuries. Her left leg was mangled, blood seeping through the intricate armor plates. She needed medical attention, and fast. Carter had no idea where the nearest Zalari outpost was, but leaving her here meant certain death. Summoning his remaining strength, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her frame almost weightless against him. She made a small sound of protest but didn't fight him. Perhaps she knew she had no choice. Navigating the dense jungle with an injured alien queen in his arms was not how Carter had imagined his day, but survival often required adaptation. As night fell, he found shelter in a shallow cave, hidden beneath the thick canopy. He set her down gently, scanning his suit's limited medpack for anything that might help. Antiseptic foam would prevent infection, and a makeshift splint would keep her leg stable. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he worked, she studied him with quiet intensity. "You are human," she finally said, her voice soft but edged with curiosity. Carter smirked. "Good guess." Her expression didn't change. "You saved me. Wouldn't be much of a soldier if I left people to die." A silence stretched between them before she spoke again. "I am Queen Ceres of the Zalari Dominion." Carter froze. His hands paused mid-motion. Queen. Of course she was. The ornate armor, the undeniable air of authority. He should have known. He had just saved the ruler of an entire species. He exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, Your Majesty, it looks like you're stuck with me." Her gaze lingered on him, something unreadable flickering in her alien eyes. I do not believe in fate, she said slowly. But your presence here, it is unexpected. Carter huffed a quiet laugh. Tell me about it. As the night stretched on, they spoke in hushed tones. She told him of the attack, that her ship had been escorting crucial envoys when an unknown enemy intercepted them. Her guards had been slaughtered, her ship torn apart before it could send a distress signal. She had managed to survive the crash, but her chances of making it back to safety alone had been non-existent. Carter listened, absorbing every detail. The attack on her vessel mirrored what had happened to his own. This wasn't random. Someone was targeting both humans and Zalari. The realization sent a cold shiver down his spine. They weren't safe. Distant howls echoed through the jungle, a guttural, unnatural sound that made Saris tense. Carter's grip tightened on his weapon. He had heard those sounds before. Predators, ones drawn to blood and weakness. They had to move at first light. Saris met his gaze, understanding passing between them. She may have been a queen, but out here titles meant nothing. They were just two survivors against an unknown enemy. And the night was long. The jungle never truly slept. Even in the deepest hours of the night, it pulsed with unseen life. Distant creatures chirped and clicked, their sounds reverberating through the dense undergrowth. Somewhere beyond the trees, something large moved, its heavy steps crunching foliage, but it never came close enough to see. Carter remained awake, watching over Saris as she rested. The antiseptic foam had done its job, sealing the wound on her leg, but she was far from recovered. Her breath was shallow, her body tense even in sleep. He knew the signs of someone too injured to let their guard down completely. He had been there before on battlefields light years away. Dawn came slowly, spilling gold and violet hues across the sky. Carter nudged Saris awake, his voice low but firm. They couldn't stay. The wreckage of her ship was a beacon to anyone looking, and he had no doubt that whoever had taken them down would send scavengers to confirm their kills. She stirred with a quiet groan, wincing as she shifted her injured leg. He offered her an arm without a word, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Moving was slow. Carter had fashioned a better crutch for her out of the thick, flexible branches he had found, but every step was still an effort. He watched her closely, noting the way she clenched her jaw, refusing to let pain slow her. A queen's pride, he supposed. She had yet to complain, even when the uneven terrain made things difficult. The nearest Zalari outpost, Carter said, breaking the silence as they pushed through the jungle. How far? Saris exhaled, adjusting her weight against the crutch. A day's journey, perhaps less if we move quickly. He frowned. That's a long walk with an injured leg. I do not have a choice, she replied evenly. Neither do you. That much was true. Carter had no illusions about his odds alone. Even if he could last on this planet, rescue wasn't coming. The fleet had been decimated, and his people had no reason to believe he was still alive. His best chance lay with Saris. The morning passed in strained silence. The jungle was thick, its foliage pressing in on all sides. Carter moved carefully, scanning for threats while keeping a steady pace. Saris, for all her injury, was resilient. She lagged but never stopped, never once asking him to slow. He found himself grudgingly impressed. Midday brought them to a river, wide and fast-moving, its crystalline water reflecting the strange sky above. Carter crouched at the edge, filling his canteen. He took a slow sip before offering it to Saris. She hesitated only briefly before accepting. He watched her carefully as she drank. Her alien features were sharp yet elegant, her skin tinged with the faintest golden hue in the light. The chitinous armor along her arms and shoulders shimmered slightly, catching the sun. Even wounded, there was something regal about her, something unyielding. Carter sat back, exhaling. That attack, your ship, my transport. It wasn't a coincidence, was it? Saris's expression hardened. She handed the canteen back. No. Carter expected as much. Who are they? For a long moment she didn't answer. Then finally she spoke. The Zareth Dominion. He swore under his breath. The Zareth were ghosts, a warlike species that operated in the shadows, striking at vulnerable systems before vanishing without a trace. They had no homeworld, no known bases, only whispers and wreckage left in their wake. Cerys's gaze was steady. They seek conquest. The Zalari have held them back for decades. But now, they grow bolder. Carter ran a hand through his hair, thinking, and humans? We were just collateral damage? Or is there more to it? She hesitated. The Zareth do not attack without purpose. If they struck at both our peoples, it means they see us as threats. A pause. Or opportunities. Carter's stomach turned. That was worse. A full-scale war with the Zareth would be catastrophic, especially if they were making moves against both Zalari and humans at once. The sound of breaking branches snapped him from his thoughts. Instinct took over. He moved fast, grabbing Cerys and pulling her down behind a fallen log. She let out a sharp breath but didn't protest. Together, they listened. The noise came from across the river. Shadows moved between the trees, figures humanoid but wrong. Tall, armored bodies, their exoskeletons glinting darkly. Zareth. Carter tightened his grip on his weapon. Their pursuers had arrived. Cerys's fingers brushed his arm, a silent question. He met her gaze and nodded. Yes, he had seen them too. There were at least 4, maybe more in the trees beyond. They moved with purpose, scanning the ground, searching. Carter had spent enough time in war zones to recognize a tracking party when he saw one. They were being hunted. His mind raced. They couldn't outrun them, not with Cerys injured. A direct fight was suicide. That left one option. He leaned in close, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. Can you swim? She gave him a sharp look. Yes. Good. He glanced at the river. It was fast, unpredictable, but it led away from here. If they could use it to break their trail. Cerys followed his gaze, understanding flickering in her alien eyes. She gave a small, resolute nod. Carter inhaled. On my mark. The Zareth were getting closer. Another few seconds and they'd spot them. No time to hesitate. Go, he whispered. They moved as one. Cerys pushed off the log, and Carter grabbed her, pulling them both into the river's current. The shock of the cold was immediate, but he held tight to her, kicking hard as the water pulled them downstream. Behind them, the Zareth shouted. Carter barely had time to process before the current dragged them under. Water filled his ears, pressure crushing his chest as the river threw them forward. He kept hold of Cerys, guiding them toward the surface. They broke through, gasping for air just as the river twisted violently, hurling them deeper into its grip. Everything became a blur of motion. Rocks jutted from the water, slick and jagged. Carter twisted, shielding Cerys from the worst of it as they crashed downstream. His body ached, lungs burning, but he forced himself to hold on. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the current slowed. Carter dragged himself onto the riverbank, coughing out water. Cerys collapsed beside him, chest heaving. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Cerys started laughing. It was soft, breathless, almost incredulous. Carter turned his head, raising an eyebrow. You find this funny? He asked, voice rough. She met his gaze, still catching her breath. We live. He exhaled a quiet chuckle. Yeah, for now. Their respite was brief. They had shaken their pursuers, but it wouldn't last. The Zareth wouldn't stop hunting them. If anything, now they would be more relentless. Cerys sat up, grimacing as she checked her injured leg. The wound had reopened, blood seeping through the hastily wrapped bandages. Carter frowned. We need to get to your outpost. Fast. She nodded. We are close. If we move now, we can reach it before nightfall. Carter pushed himself up, muscles aching, but there was no time to rest. He reached out, offering Cerys a hand. She took it without hesitation. As they moved, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The Zareth weren't just after Cerys. They were after something more, and he was right in the middle of it. The outpost was closer than Carter expected, but reaching it was another matter entirely. The jungle thinned as they pressed forward, replaced by jagged rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient scars. Saris limped beside him, her breathing measured but tight. The river had bought them time, but not much. The Zareth would regroup, and once they had their scent again, there would be no losing them a second time. Carter scanned the horizon. Beyond the rocks, the terrain sloped downward, leading into a vast valley where the remnants of an old Zalari structure stood. It was sleek and angular, its dark metal catching the dying light of the sun. A communications array jutted from its peak, still functional if they were lucky. Saris followed his gaze. It was once an observation post, abandoned now, but the emergency beacon may still work. That's our best shot, Carter said. If we can get a signal out, your people can send a retrieval team. She nodded, shifting her weight slightly. He could tell she was pushing herself beyond her limits. The wound on her leg had worsened. He saw it in the stiffness of her movements, the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her balance. You're running on fumes, he said. We should stop for a moment. No, her voice was firm, her pride unyielding. We move. Carter exhaled but didn't argue. He understood stubbornness when he saw it. Instead, he adjusted his position, keeping close enough that if she faltered, he could catch her. They reached the outpost as the last light of day faded. Up close, it was clear the structure had seen better days. Deep gashes scarred its surface, remnants of battles long past. The main entrance was sealed, but Saris pressed her palm against a hidden panel along the side. With a faint hum, the door shuddered open. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with the scent of metal and decay. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows against the walls. The control room lay ahead, a central console blinking with what little power remained. Saris moved toward it, fingers dancing across the interface. Lines of alien script scrolled across the display, but the meaning was clear: systems damaged, signal strength low. Carter frowned. Can you get a distress call out? Saris narrowed her eyes. Perhaps. She adjusted a frequency, static crackling in response. If the relay is intact, we can amplify the signal. He glanced toward the door. We'd better do it fast. A sound echoed from outside, distant at first, then closer. A rhythmic clicking, like chitin scraping against stone. Saris froze, her gaze snapping to his. They found us. Carter moved quickly, shouldering his rifle as he crossed the room. He pressed himself against the wall, peering through a gap in the metal. In the darkness beyond, movement stirred. Shapes emerged, tall figures with segmented armor, their glowing eyes scanning the ruins. Zareth hunters. He turned back to Saris. How long? Minutes, she whispered. Perhaps less. They didn't have minutes. Carter's mind raced. The Zareth were cautious predators, but once they confirmed their prey was cornered, they would strike with overwhelming force. Their best chance was to hold them off long enough for the distress signal to reach someone, anyone. He adjusted his grip on his weapon. Keep working on the signal. I'll slow them down. Saris hesitated. Carter, just do it, he said, moving toward the door. Outside, the Zareth spread out, their movements unervingly fluid. Carter exhaled, steadying himself. Then he stepped out and fired. The first shot slammed into the closest Zareth, its armor cracking under the force. The creature hissed, stumbling back. The others reacted instantly, their elongated limbs propelling them forward. Carter didn't wait. He ducked behind a fallen beam as plasma fire erupted, scorching the walls behind him. He moved quickly, shifting positions between cover, forcing them to split their attention. One of them broke from the group, flanking to the right. Carter caught the movement too late. A sharp pain exploded across his shoulder as a Zareth blade slashed through his armor, sending him sprawling. The creature loomed over him, its mandibles clicking. Carter twisted, yanking his knife free and driving it up into the Zareth's throat. The alien convulsed before slumping forward, its weight pressing him into the dirt. He shoved it off just as another lunged. Before it could strike, a shot rang out. The Zareth jerked, a searing wound carving through its chest. Carter turned to see Saris standing in the doorway, weapon in hand. She tossed him a comm device. The signal is out. Carter caught it, breathing heavily. Then we just have to survive until help arrives. More Zareth emerged from the darkness. Dozens now, their eyes glowing like fireflies in the night. Saris stepped beside him. Despite her injury, she stood tall, shoulders squared. Then we make our stand. Carter grinned despite himself. Wouldn't have it any other way. As the Zareth charged, they raised their weapons and opened fire. The first wave came fast, a blur of chitin and glowing eyes. Carter fired in controlled bursts, each shot precise, each kill necessary. The Zareth were agile, moving in unpredictable patterns, their elongated limbs propelling them over obstacles with unnatural grace. One vaulted over a crumbling console, talons flashing in the dim light. Carter met it with a shot to the chest, sending it crashing to the floor. Saris fought beside him, her plasma weapon singing through the air. Despite her injury, she moved with the lethal efficiency of a trained warrior. A Zareth came too close, and she spun, driving an armored elbow into its throat before finishing it with a precise shot. Carter spared her a glance. She was holding her own, but he could see the strain in the tightness of her jaw, the way she slightly favored her good leg. More of them poured in through the broken entrance, their clawed feet skittering against the metal. Carter and Saris fell back, covering each other as they moved toward the control room. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows that twisted as the battle raged. A blast from one of the Zareth weapons struck near Carter's head, sending shards of molten metal scattering. He ducked, his ears ringing. The outpost wasn't going to hold, not for long. Saris must have realized it too. "We cannot win this fight," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. Carter reloaded, pressing his back against the console. "No, but we can buy time." The signal was out, but there was no telling if anyone had received it. He had fought in too many losing battles to put faith in rescue until he saw it with his own eyes. A Zareth lunged at Saris, its blade arcing toward her throat. She twisted at the last second, the blade skimming past her armor. She retaliated with a vicious upward strike, her claws extending as she tore through its neck. The creature gurgled before collapsing. Carter moved closer, shielding her flank as more poured in. His rifle overheated, forcing him to switch to his sidearm. The shots were weaker, but at this range they were still lethal. Then the floor beneath them trembled. For a split second, Carter thought it was an explosion. But no, this was something else. A deep, resonating hum vibrated through the walls, growing in intensity. The Zareth hesitated. Even they seemed unsure. Saris's eyes widened. Something is coming. Carter didn't ask what. He felt it too, the shift in the air, the electric charge that raised the hairs on his arms. A brilliant flash of light erupted outside, followed by the deafening roar of engines. A ship, sleek, dark, unmistakably Zalari, descended from the sky. Its cannons glowed with lethal energy. The Zareth turned as one, their formation breaking. Then the sky rained fire. The Zalari vessel unleashed hell, plasma rounds streaking through the air, turning the jungle beyond the outpost into a battlefield. The Zareth screeched, scrambling for cover. Some fled, vanishing into the darkness, but others stood their ground, desperate to finish what they had started. Carter seized the opening. "Move!" He grabbed Saris's arm, half dragging her toward the exit as the ship's side bay opened. Zalari warriors in shimmering armor leaped down, weapons raised. They moved with deadly precision, cutting down the remaining Zareth with coordinated strikes. One of them, a tall figure clad in ornate battleplate, strode forward. His voice was sharp, authoritative. "Queen Saris, we are here to extract you." Relief flickered across Saris's face, but she didn't let her guard drop. "You took your time." The warrior inclined his head. "We had to ensure your pursuers did not escape to report back." Carter exhaled, his grip tightening on his weapon before finally lowering it. He felt the exhaustion creeping in now, the adrenaline crash after relentless combat. He had fought alongside many soldiers before, but this had been something else. Saris turned to him. There was something unreadable in her gaze. "Come with us." Carter hesitated. "I don't think your people want a human on board." The warrior standing beside Saris didn't argue, but his expression made it clear he agreed. Saris, however, stepped forward. "You saved my life," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. "The Zareth do not move without purpose. If they targeted us both, then your people are in danger too." Carter ran a hand through his sweat-damp hair. He knew she was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The Zareth had exposed their hand, but they had not yet played their final move. He glanced back at the ruins of the outpost. The battle was won, but the war was only beginning. Carter turned to Saris, exhaling. "All right," he said. "Let's finish this." Without another word, he followed her onto the ship. The doors sealed behind them, and as they lifted off, Carter knew one thing for certain. The real fight was just beginning.